Like I saw the reading list. I saw the reading list that he put out from the summit, and like one of the books that I was surprised to see on there was a book that was recommended to me by one of my professors at Evergreen in the fall of 1989 that I read on her recommendation. It's a book called From Scythia to Camelot that was written by Linda A. Malcor and C. Scott Littleton. That is about it's about a theory that the some of the Arthurian material actually may trace to the Nart sagas, which are originated in the Caucasus region. And this professor at Evergreen was she was Russian, and she was Orthodox, and so she was very into this theory, and she knew I liked Arthurian stuff, and so she recommended it to me. She also organized a field trip to Russian Orthodox Church for our Great Books program when we were studying the Tale of Igor's campaign. This beautiful old historic Russian Orthodox church in Wilkinson, Washington, and they have Old Slavonic liturgy there. And so, since we were studying a work that was originally written in Old Slavonic, she thought it might be nice for us to get, a feel for like the culture and the sound of the language by going and attending an Old Slavonic liturgy while we were studying the text.
I'm gonna go back to an earlier part of the conversation where we talked about everything being so Christological and how that for some reason like seems to like rob the creativity of something in art. And this also goes back to kind of bringing in. I'm interested, Nate, in your fascination with the King Arthur, but also when I had this conversation with this guy who was at Symbolic World, that I said came from Albania to Greece, and he said, Albania has. It's funny when he was listening to Martin Shaw talk about the one of the stories he told about the 7 mountains of something, and then he said in our country it's the 5 mountains, like in our tale. Like there's these overlapping of myth, and
Yes.
the other thing that he said was that this goes to the Christological thing, which I've been like intuiting, like being kind of so formed in what was called the gospel center movement with in Christianity with like every story is Christological, and Justin I know is more familiar I think with that world with the Young, Restless, and Reformed type stuff is like, and in the Presbyterian Church and stuff. But he was saying that these stories, they map onto our life. And he was talking about like the patriarchs and how the patriarchs can kind of represent, in Justin's world, like these these different kinds of plots that we get, and that how I'm trying to pull these ideas together that there's more to the human story and the human condition when we recognize them in humans that are looking to Christ, but not that everything that we should be relating to is Jesus Christ because he's God or something like that. I don't know if that.
Well, no, actually, I'm glad you actually brought me back on track to the point that I started to make before I sidetracked myself by my meandering way of talking sometimes.
I have no idea how I did that.
And that is the thing. It's a thing that Martin said in the conversation that he had with Sherry, my co-host over at Grail Country, where he said one of his realizations he has in coming back to Christianity and realizing just how big Christ was is that Christianity was the big shamanism he had always been looking for. So he had been looking for. He had seen the pattern of unity in all these stories, right? He had seen the pattern of unity in all these stories that he'd been studying, but it took that epiphany of the mossy face of Christ for him to see that the unity that he was seeing, that Christ is what it was pointing to. So that big thing that connects all the spirits in the hierarchy in their proper order,
And the saints.
and right, exactly, yeah, is what was Christ all along. But he had to he had to go through the pathways he went through to be able to see that. And for me, it's much the same. It's like my thing was, the way I express it is like, It's not so much. It's that I realized I had been a Christian all along, and but I didn't know that the thing that I was looking for, like I didn't know that it was Christ, but it definitely was.
Thoughts, Justin?
Well, I mean, I think it's like getting past the thumbnail low resolution projection, you know, like the thumbnail low resolution projection of, let's say, Christ is what in people's minds. You know, it might be associated with any number of cheesy.
It's just it's well, actually, there's a line from a song that I loved when I was young, and I kind of still love it because there's a lot of good impulse in it. It's a song, the song Operation Spirit by the band Live, right? Where there's a line in the song where it says like there's a line about there's a lot of talk about this Jesus, a man of love, a man of strength, but what a man was 2,000 years ago means nothing at all to me today. Well, that's true. If that's all Jesus is a man who lived in Palestine 2,000 years ago and nothing else, then it doesn't mean anything at all to you. You have to come to see Christ as the image of the living God that is in all of these other things as well before the pieces like fit together, and he becomes a living Christ to you.
I think it's kind of like when you think you know let's say a celebrity, but you've never met them in person, so you have some kind of projection of who they are in your mind, and that's and that's all it is for you, you know. And for a lot of people, you could say Christ is a word you say to get status. Or it's a, you know, whatever, some kind of a tool in your life or something. But then when you meet the real person, you go, gosh, you know, they're nothing like what I thought they were. I thought, you know, I had an image of them in my mind. I had even their voice patterns in my mind, but they're nothing like what I thought. So there's certainly a difference between meeting the logos and whatever projection you have, whatever low resolution projection you have of who you think Christ is. And I can say that you know, that's probably why people don't really like movie portrayals of Christ, because it plays into this low resolution. You know, I mean, how can you show the logos in a movie? You know, like so I'm always of the idea that the reason why it's so hard to put these biblical stories into movie form, or even, you know, novel form or whatever, you know, is because it's the light. It's like you're looking right at the light, you know.
Right, which is why I think there's still a place for the folktales and the myth, because you do get it, but you get it. It's like the line from the Emily Dickinson poem, like, tell the truth but tell it slant, right? So when in the myths and the folktales, you're going to encounter Christ, but you're going to encounter him slant. But here's the thing, though. If you allow those things to work on you, they will end up giving you like a fuller picture than this sort of like reduced caricature kind of image.
That's really interesting.
Because it really is in all things.
That makes me think, you know, Peugeot going into fairy tales and comics, and Martin Shaw not telling a Bible story at Symbolic World.
Well, I mean, for example, you could take Lord of the Rings, you know, and you could say Aragorn. So prophet, priest, and king, Aragorn, Frodo, and Gandalf, you know.
Right.
And I remember there was a time where in the theological circles that I was in, people were criticizing Lord of the Rings for not having a proper Christ figure and splitting it up between the three. Right. But to me, I'm going, no, that is exactly what you need to do. Right. Because, I mean, if you're going to...
Right, because that's how you fight against the caracature Christ that people have in their heads. Is like, you don't let them know what you're doing, which I think is why Tolkien criticized Lewis for how heavy-handed his allegory was in the Narnia series. I think Tolkien was wrong. I think Lewis is way more clever in that than Tolkien gives him credit for. But it's a legitimate criticism, because the idea that you should not be absolutely direct about it is actually, in fact, the right approach.
Well, that was the one of the biggest things I picked up from Martin and Justin, and we had this conversation I think too, was about leaving room, like leaving space for the imagination or whatever. I'm curious. Go ahead if you want.
No, that's good. That leaving room, because that's what we were talking about earlier when we were talking about the kinds of films that Justin was taking about. That's what those films are doing.
Yeah.
Which is why they more readily allow the person who's watching the film to engage in that different mode of attention than just like I'm sitting here watching the latest, like Transformers movie or whatever.
And that's the leaving the space. And I guess the question, why it begs this to me is, why iconoclasm and why the need for, like when these things get so buried, I guess, it's easy for me, I say easy, maybe Justin, to bring our extremely formed Christological upbringings and training and theologies into these myths, and then be able to be like, okay, yeah, let's separate this a little bit. This is a little stuffy. But if that's all you've had, like maybe you need a little bit of extra Christ to come in. And it's almost like when all these evangelicals go into Orthodoxy, like Martin Shaw, like it's so inherent into his Pentecostal upbringing or charismatic upbringing that it informs these things. Or even Father Stephen, or even Jonathan Peugeot, like they're bringing so much Jesus, like into these things, and I think that's important to consider.
Martin Shaw is still so Pentecostal. I got news for him. Really, if you look at what he does. Like when he's on the stage and he's doing a storytelling, he's very much someone who is trusting the Spirit and letting the Spirit move him, like 100% for sure. There's something very Pentecostal about what he's doing.